All right. Good morning, everyone, or afternoon. It's noon. It's afternoon. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for our virtual Rebel Recharge lecture. I am Gabrielle Engel, a proud 2010 Boyd School of Law alumna and your UNLV Alumni Association president. It is my honor to personally welcome each of you here today. I would like to also give a special welcome and thanks to Blake Douglas, Associate Vice President for Alumni Engagement and Executive Director of the UNLV Alumni Association, and Renee Rivera-Gelfi, Coordinator for Programs and Events, for producing today's virtual lecture. We have a great lineup of engaging and educational talks that we are excited to share this spring. You can see our full schedule of events at engage.unlv.edu/events. Our next virtual Rebel Recharge lecture will take place on Friday, May 20th, and is entitled Rebel Recharge, Power Up Your Personal Brand. Dr. Darren Vetter will provide helpful tips and tools to help you translate your personal brand and story to power up your cover letter, LinkedIn profile, and other forms of marketing. Our goal is to continue to grow our programs and events and create fun, educational, and engaging opportunities for our alumni, faculty, staff, students, and community members. Today's discussion is entitled Difficult Conversations, How to Make Them Less Painful and More Productive, presented by Dr. David Schwartz. Dr. Schwartz is a professor, gaming historian, and Ombuds at UNLV. He studies gambling and casinos, video games, popular culture, Las Vegas, tourism, and conflict resolution. He is also executive director of the Far West Popular Culture Association and has written several books, including At the Sands, the casino that shaped classic Las Vegas, brought the Rat Pack together, and went out with a bang. Please join me in welcoming Dr. David Schwartz.
Hey, thank you very much, Gabriel. I'm going to share my screen now. There we go. Sharing. You should be seeing two penguins walking away from each other who have just had a difficult penguin conversation. I don't know what that would be about, but they did. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit today about, first of all, what makes a conversation difficult, then how to make them less painful, and finally hit on a few keys to making them productive. And along the way, we have a lot of polls. This is interactive. I want to stop and ask people their opinions, so very interactive. Before I start, I want to say there's two books that I really use to get a lot of this knowledge from. One of them is Stone, Patton, and Heen's Difficult Conversations, which is a very well-known book. The other one is an older book by Elgin called The Gentle Art of Verbal Self-Defense. It's a little bit borrowing from both of those. Okay, so what is a difficult conversation? Basically, there's a couple elements. Number one, it could be that the subject matter itself is troubling. Let's say you have to give somebody bad news. It could be that the conversation is very high stakes. So even if it's not bad news, it's going to have really big consequences. So it's very important that it go very well. Three, you could have a bad history with the individual. And I deal with this a lot in my job as ombuds. You know, some people, it seems like every time they're talking to each other, they're arguing about something. So when they see the person, automatically the stress hormones start to go because they think they're going to argue. We're going to get into this later, but a big part of these conversations is that they make you wonder whether you are the person you think you are. Are you as good as you think you are? Finally, these conversations get harder depending on how comfortable you are with confronting people. Some people are very low, not very assertive. They don't like to confront people. So then asking for anything becomes a difficult conversation. Okay, so my first poll question for you is, are you comfortable with confrontation? How many of you say, yes, I love it? And this is all, I like that it's going back and forth because some people are very comfortable with it. Some people are not. Again, some professions you can imagine. Trial attorney, I think most of them are pretty comfortable with confrontation. Other jobs, not so much. Okay, so we've got about 3/4 of people are not comfortable with confrontations, right? That's good to know. That makes these conversations difficult. Okay. So making this even more difficult to pull out is that when you say something, you actually say 4 things at once. Number 1, there is what you think in your head. Like, this is what I'm going to say, and it's going to sound great. So there's that. Then from the brain to the mouth, something happens. Maybe I'm the only one this happens to, but something happens, and the words that come out are never quite the way they sounded when you said it in your head. So you've got that. So I meant to say this. This is what I actually said. Then you have what other people heard. And I've been in many meetings where somebody said something and another person hears something totally differently. You even see this in emails sometimes. So other people hear it. And then the last part is that other people hear it and then they tell somebody a different story. So you mean to say, I'm always glad to see you. You say, I'm thinking of this off the top of my head. So it's always great. Oh, I always like seeing this person. You say, well, it's good to see you for once. They hear, why don't I see you more? And they tell people, well, they said that they were mad that I'm not there more. So that's how it can get mangled as it goes through. So because of this, it's really important to choose what you say and your tone very carefully, because again, people will be interpreting this. People will be listening to this and talking about it. Now, in addition to the 4 things that you say, there's 3 conversations. So that makes 12 total things we're worried about here. So 3 conversations. When you have a conversation that is high stakes, difficult, whatever you want to call it, it's actually 3 things happening simultaneously. Number 1, you're talking about what happened. Number 2, you're talking about emotions and feelings around what happened. And number 3, there's going to be questions about somebody's identity. So I have an example for you. If somebody says to me after we're all done, well, that was a really bad workshop today. Okay, what happened is I didn't do a good job. It didn't go well. The emotions, I'm ashamed because I respect everybody so much and I want to do a good job for Rebel Reset and the Alumni Association. I'm sad. I thought it would be great. I'm mad at myself. I regret that I didn't do a good job. So I'm feeling those emotions. And at the same time, like, I like to think I'm a good presenter. So I'm like, well, God, I guess I'm not good at what I do. So you kind of pack all that into one statement. So I've got another one here. Maybe you've heard this. You know, people have again come to the office and say that they've been told this. A lot of people say that you're difficult to work with. A lot of people say that you're difficult to work with. What happened in this? And feel free to type something in the chat or do a voice. What do you think happened here when somebody says that to you? A lot of people say you're difficult to work with. And the one downside of Zoom over some other yep, you're put on the defensive. Yeah. So that goes into the emotional thing. So like Joni says, people complain to them instead of, yes, I like what Kim said. So people complain to them instead of talking to you. So people are talking about you behind your back and they're saying bad things. Yeah, they have an issue with you. And again, it would be one thing, as Joni said, like you're already defensive from the start because number one, people talking about you behind your back. Number two, they're saying bad things. Yeah. And then I like what Jay Flood says, what is a lot? Yeah, who is this lot of people? And we hear this a lot. A lot of people say you're difficult to work with. Well, what does that mean? And what did you say back to them? That's my question. Then the feelings, like, so if somebody says a lot of people say you're difficult to work with, how does that make you feel? Anybody come home from work and when they see their family, I had a great day today. They said I was difficult to work with. Yeah, angry, ashamed, yeah. Sad. And guess what? Talking to somebody about something important like changing their behavior is never going to go well when you're feeling that. And last, we have identity, which like a lot of people say you're difficult to work with. What does that say about your identity? I mean, do most people walk around thinking they're difficult to get along with? Some people do. But do most of us, I would imagine that 70% of people who aren't comfortable with confrontation, like probably think they're pretty easy to get along with. So that would raise some identity question. Yeah, am I actually a mean person? Is that me? Am I mean? Or my intentions? Yeah, I'm less confident. Do I come across as being difficult to work with? I didn't think so. I was just trying to do a good job. This is common. Okay. Okay. So what is the poll question here? What is the most difficult part about difficult conversations? Okay, we have the subject matter, this tough subject matter, dealing with confrontation, questions about identity, or anxiety about the consequences. Like, oh my God, I have to go in and ask for a raise. I like my boss, we get along, but I'm worried that they'll think I'm too pushy or something if I ask for a raise, so that makes it hard. Dealing with confrontation and consequences are running right along here, yeah, okay. So consequences and confrontations, yeah, that is pretty difficult. That is pretty difficult. Okay. Yeah. Right. So how to make them less painful is next. We accept this is what they are. They could be really bad. And I also want to say, like, starting this conversation off just can tank the whole thing, because once you start in a bad place, it's really hard to recover and do better. And it's kind of like in customer service, when you have something bad that happens to a customer, you have to go into customer recovery mode, which is very difficult, very difficult. So we'll see how we can start by making the less painful to start with. So number one is to plan for them. You wouldn't think of going to, so whether it's, the Golden Knights or the Raiders, teams don't just show up and be like, well, I'm going to play the game. These are all people who get paid a lot of money to play different games. They don't just show up and say, all right, let's just play. We'll see what happens. They plan beforehand. You have to do that. Same thing with this kind of conversation. Like, this is a really big deal, especially if you're talking to a supervisor or somebody who does a lot more of these. You've got a lot less practice with it. You need to train, and you need to first be aware of what your outcome is. What do you want? What is it you want to learn from the person? What is it you want to establish from the person? Can you have a learning conversation rather than just lecturing them or dumping on them, or just saying, I don't like you, or I don't like this. Also, a very important part of this is, half of it is you having the confidence to say what you want to say. The other half is being able to listen to the person and hear what they say. And again, when two people are talking and neither are listening, that also will go bad. Things escalate very quickly. So planning to, like, hey, here's my goal. Now, if you just want to go in and make somebody feel bad about themselves, that's really easy to do. That's no problem. Comedians do that for a little, like Don Rickles, I guess Chris Rock at the Oscars. Really easy to make somebody feel bad about themselves. Really hard to tell them something, a truth that you have, and then listen to them. And maybe it's not going to be totally positive from them. So that's the difficult part. Next is how to untangle the three conversations. So first are the mistakes about what happened. And there's a couple things here. Number one, a lot of times when people talk, they have the truth assumption, which is, I know I'm right. I know what I saw. I'm right. I know what's happening here. That's the number one thing. That's usually dangerous. It's very possible that you are right, but it's always possible that you're wrong too. And what you see, you don't necessarily always see the whole picture. And I know, again, in my work as ombuds, I have people come to me with issues, and often there's things that they don't know about, which gets us to our next thing, which is they invent people's intention. So again, you said that to hurt me. You were late because you don't respect me. No, I'm late because the police were doing enforcement and everybody was going 35 miles an hour through the airport connector today, which was the northbound airport connector onto University Center Drive this morning. The police were out there doing enforcement, so everybody was driving very slowly. So again, you can never really know somebody's intent. You can know what they tell you it is, but you can't know it. Next up is the blame frame. This is your fault. So again, starting a conversation with somebody, hey, I want to talk to you about something, with, I know what happened, I know why you did it, and guess what, it's all your fault. There's really no room for them to go from there. They're either like, oh my God, you're totally right, I'm wrong about everything, or they get defensive. And that's, again, you're not going to have a learning conversation there. There's then the role of emotions, which you can avoid. And some people take the Mr. Spock route to difficult conversations, which is like have no emotion, pure logic, which might work for some things. I mean, if you're buying a car or something like that, it works. But if you're talking about your working relationship with someone you see every day, emotions are going to be part of it, and you can incorporate them. You can do that. The last is identity. When you have to give somebody bad news, it's very important to contextualize the what happened part of it with who they are. And I think a lot of people do this, and it's a good thing to do, where if you have to, let's say, give somebody a bad performance review, you can highlight, hey, look, you are great at all this stuff. There are a couple issues. Because you are such a good employee, I think you're ready to hear this message, even though it's difficult, and I think you're going to get better from this. As opposed to, hey, you're bad at your job, and your job is a big part of who you are, so you must be a bad person. You know, you need to disentangle that. And it's difficult because a lot of times, probably more so in academia, although I guess in every field, a lot of people are very invested in their professional competence and their professional reputation. So challenging that is always difficult. Okay, next, we have the cake. This is called Ask One Answer. In general, statements make us defensive. If you want to get somebody defensive, make a statement about them. Like, hey, I'm going to give you an example in a second. A question tends to get us thinking, and it might be thinking about a solution. So statements trigger the emotional part of the brain. Questions tend to trigger the logical part of the brain, unless it's a question like, what's wrong with you? Let's see. Okay, so let's say you ate that cake and the cake is not good. So you say to the baker, this cake tastes awful. Where can they go from there? Yeah, you know, like, oh my God, I'm sorry. Or, well, you don't have good taste buds. Versus, where'd you find this recipe? I've never tasted a cake that tasted quite like this. Where'd you find this recipe? You could, oh, well, this is my first time baking and I did this. Well, you know, maybe it is a little bit too sweet. Yeah, maybe it is. I used tablespoons instead of teaspoons. So that way you're not challenging their competence as a baker. So we've got a poll question here. How would you start this conversation? If you taste the cake, and I'm gonna give you a couple of assumptions here. The cake tastes awful. The person, let's say, is going to be making this cake for their family soon. So you definitely want to give them helpful advice. You don't just want to lie and say it tastes great. So you need to give them good advice, but you want to do it in a gentle way. So how would you start the conversation? With like, it doesn't taste good. Maybe saying that would be bad, but like, how long have you been baking? Is this a new recipe? That's a good one. Is this a family recipe? Obviously, it's a family recipe. You need to be very careful. Oh, really? Well, taste can be subjective. What's it supposed to taste like? But you know, if anybody worked in a restaurant, people return dishes all the time. And it's perfectly good dish. They just had an image in their mind of what they thought it would be. So, you know, no accounting for taste, I guess. So is this a new recipe? Seems to be popular. Family recipe, which ingredients did you use? How long have you been baking? So these are all good. And again, kind of easing into it with the question is a good one, All right, we'll go to the next one. So presuppositions is another really important thing. Now, a presupposition in this context is basically something that somebody who speaks English would know as part of the meaning of the phrase, but you don't come out and say it. So for example, if somebody says, oh, Dave, how's it going? I say, you know, I still like my job. Technically, that's true. I still like my job. But putting the word still in there, there's a lot of presuppositions. Well, I liked my job in the past. You know that. Something happened that would make me not like my job. Most people wouldn't like it if this happened, but because I'm an exceptional person, I've gotten over it. I'm a professional. I can get beyond this. I still like my job. So even though the words just say I'm continuing to like my job, there is a context there. So that is the presupposition. Like, well, I still like my job. Other people wouldn't, but I do. And again, these can be very passive aggressive. So Next slide here, weaponizing the presupposition. So that was kind of, defensive, but this one can be putting the other person on the defensive. So for example, let's say a student turns in their assignment late. I've actually used this one as my way of kind of gently trying to not encourage this behavior while accepting them. Like, hey, some professors would be upset that you handed this in late. So what am I saying when I say some professors would be upset? First of all, have I talked to every professor? And I know that some of them would be, probably not. But what I'm saying is this: it's wrong to hand things in late. You shouldn't have done this. I'm a really special professor because I let you get away with this. And you should be grateful that you're in my class, because these other professors, they wouldn't let you get away with it. And you should feel real guilty about this. And this is seen a lot in domestic things like, well, some wives would be mad that their husbands are doing this. Some husbands would resent that their wives are doing this. That tends to be, well, I have every right to feel this way, but I'm not, and you should be grateful that I'm not. So that's a dangerous presupposition that you probably want to avoid. Even if somebody isn't conscious of it, it will put them on the defensive. Okay, my other favorite one, well, this is low even for you. Like, what does that say? This is bad even for you. Everyone else can do whatever this thing is, whatever you're trying to do. And maybe I should have been more specific here. Whatever you're trying to do, everyone else can do it. You can't, because there's something wrong with you. You're a broken human being that you can't do this. And what's more, I don't expect you to do it right. So I thought it was going to be bad. It's even worse than I thought. And coming from you, I'm not surprised. It's really hard to go from that to constructive criticism or having any kind of growth conversation. You've basically dug yourself a hole. Okay, so even for you, you want to avoid that. Some more presuppositions. You did better than I thought you would. Hey, how'd the workshop go? Hey, you did better than I thought you would. What do some people think that? What's the presuppositions there? What's that saying? You did better than I thought you would. What's the hidden message? Maybe not so hidden. I thought it would suck. I like that from Nat. Yeah, like, you did better than I thought you would. They doubted your abilities. Yeah, didn't expect much from you. I don't believe in you. Yeah, I didn't expect you to be able to do this. Yeah, low expectations. And again, a lot of people, often this is cultural. I mean, you may have someone in your extended family, you go to their home to eat, and they have to tell you, oh, I did a terrible job cooking the food. I put too much salt in it. And you have to, like, culturally, you have to say, oh no, this is wonderful. I love it. If you just say, yeah, it's better than I thought it would be, they would be very offended. So yeah, I mean, if you make something, yeah, I didn't think you would do well. So yeah, a couple of the ones I have here, I thought you would not do well. Yeah, exactly what Joni said. I don't have high expectations. What 129175 said. And other people would have done better. Again, like, you're doing it, other people, yeah, I would expect better. Here's another good one. And you can, I put this in a work context, but this can also be a personal context. Someone who really wanted to succeed wouldn't make this many errors. Somebody who really cared about their family wouldn't spend so much time away from home. Trying to think of some other good ones here, you could say. But the really wanted, really needed, somebody who really needed this job wouldn't show up late. What do you think? What are the presuppositions there? Someone who really X'd. This is a common one. Someone who really wanted whatever. Yeah, someone who really wanted to do a good workshop wouldn't rely on Zoom polling so much. I'm joking. But what does that say? I mean, what does that say if somebody says that? And I'll give people a second. Yeah, again, I really like Discord as a platform because you can, it's totally not right for this, but I like the feature where you can see the people are typing. Yeah, so it's you don't care enough. So you don't really care. You don't care, you're not trying, you're not really trying. You're not capable of it. You don't care about other people. Your desire does not match. Yeah, all that. So that's what they're thinking. You're not applying yourself. You don't really care. And again, instead of just saying you don't really care about this, if you just look at the structure of the sentence, someone who really wanted to succeed would not do that. You may not have the knowledge. The meaning of it is you don't really care. So when somebody does that, you're making too many errors. When somebody does that, and we'll get to the first poll in a second. Actually, while we put this up, I'll put it up. When somebody does that, you then have to respond to that. So here's the poll. How would you say this? Even you should know that. You should know that. I'd assumed you knew that. So this is all a painful, difficult conversation where somebody didn't know something. So we have even you should know that. You should know that. I'd assumed you knew that. Okay. All right. And also it depends on the context. It depends on the context. But we're being very generic here. And most people are saying, I had assumed you knew that. This is good. Again, in some context, you may need to say you should know that. So for example, if it's a test on a unit that the students have done, it's perfectly, you know, at this point in the course, you should know this. If it's somebody, you had the expectation that somebody would do something and they didn't, I'd assumed you knew that is a gentler way to start than even you should know that. Oh, hey, I didn't know I had to do this. Even you should know that. So, you know, if somebody, yeah, I don't know. I won't think of a hypothetical there. Let's look at the next one. We got another one here. How would you say this one? I'd assumed you knew that. How would you say this one? You did better than I thought you would. You did even better than I thought you would. Here, so originally the word even was the villain, the Marvel villain of the whole piece, kind of ruining every sentence. Even you should know better. But now even is the savior. You did even better than I thought you would. I thought you were going to do great, but you did outstandingly, which I think is an adjective. So even can be the savior there. So again, it's this little, and that one word changes the whole meaning of the sentence, again, because of the presuppositions. Okay. Loaded language is language that basically backs somebody into a corner. And I'm not going to make a dirty dancing reference there. Baby in the corner, I just did it. Anyway, starting off extreme leaves absolutely no room for the person to agree with you. And again, if you want something, it's good to have some level of agreement with each other. So for example, if you start the conversation with, you never support me. Okay, so if somebody says that to me, I either have to admit, yes, you're right, I never support you and I'm a total fraud. I'm lying to myself, I'm lying to you, I'm lying to everybody else around us, you're totally right. Or, that's not true, I support you all the time. Ugh. Versus, I don't feel supported right now. I can agree with that. Okay, maybe I'm, and then, well, yeah, I understand, maybe I'm being a little bit harsh here, I can understand that, versus you never support me, boom, I have to be defensive, otherwise I'm admitting that I am wrong, and nobody likes admitting they're wrong. Okay, versus I don't feel supported right now, the person is saying this is how I feel, they're not stating it as a fact, they're stating their opinion, and again, right now is the presupposition in this is a positive one, I felt supported in the past. So you're kind of giving the person a compliment. You know, you're usually a very supportive person. I don't feel supported at this moment. They have a lot of room. Oh yeah, I know I'm usually a very supportive person. So why don't you feel, what did I do? Okay, here's another one. You're always complaining about something, right? Again, okay, let's have a meeting, we're to talk. You know, you're always complaining about something. Maybe there seem to be a lot of challenges here. Well, and then the other person might push back with, well, you know, maybe there's some good things, which is a very good place to, well, yeah, there's some good things, but maybe we can fix some things. Yeah, you're right. Okay, what can we fix? As opposed to you're always complaining about something. No, I'm not. It's just, or yeah, because everything's terrible here. It's just a way of giving the other person room. You don't back them into a corner. Okay. Always and never rarely make a conversation more productive. So if you have the words always or never, you've got to really, really check yourself. You know, pretend that you have to pay like $1,000 every time you use them. Always and never. I'm not going to say they never make it more productive because that would be an extreme statement. If you say like, I'm always happy to see you, That's a good way. So I'm not saying never use them, because that would be in itself loaded language. Okay, so room to discuss. And generally, when people get cornered, they become defensive or they shut down. Some people externalize, they'll lash out. Some people internalize, they'll just totally shut down. In any event, you're not gonna have a good conversation. In general, if somebody has to choose who is wrong, most of the time people will choose the other person who's wrong and they who are right. It's a very rare human being who will put other person's well-being above their own. So before you say something, when you're planning and being intentional about the conversation, you want to ask yourself, if somebody said this to me, could I agree with part of it, or would this end the conversation right away? Okay, so for example, you're an idiot for doing that. Hey, full disclosure, this morning, I drilled a small hole into my left thumb. Not my brightest moment. I was doing some household work. I was holding something, drilled a little hole in my thumb. That would have been, I mean, they wouldn't have been wrong saying that. What I would have liked to have heard is, well, did you maybe not understand when you were holding that thing with the drill going around like 1,000 times a second or whatever, that the drill would go through the thing and would go through your thumb too? Yeah, you're right. I didn't think that through. I wasn't really thinking, as opposed to you're an idiot. Okay, so here we go. So which of these is more productive? Another poll question. And these are the streets of London. I don't know what the zigzaggy lines mean. Anyone who's lived there might help. Okay, why don't you care enough to get here on time? Was there a lot of road work on your commute today? So which one is going to start the conversation? Okay, and most people are saying, was there a lot of road work on your commute? Which is, again, the presupposition here is one that, yeah, you're late, but I understand there might be some contributing factors there. And again, this is about to assuming intent, the intention invention. A lot of people are late for work. When you're late for work, it's always some kind of external factor. There's a bus, somebody ran into a bus in front of you. There was traffic, there was whatever. When someone else is late, well, they didn't plan ahead. They don't want to be here. Well, they're just like you. So again, starting it with, was there a lot of road work? That makes sense. So I like that. Okay, so now we're going to get to the keys. A little bit on the nose with the keys here, but I think they're nice keys. So we have some keys here. Okay, so when you're the person who initiates a conversation, so let's say you are the supervisor giving a performance evaluation, you're the employee asking for a raise, something like that. Couple things you can do. Number one, you're pretty sure about what happened, but you're open-minded about it, but you're not just going to be a doormat and roll over. You're going to say, here's what I think happened, but you're not going to be closed off. Number two, and this, you can't really fake this. You need to really become partners in learning what is going to happen next. Rather, again, it's more like you're two people going out and discovering something together, as opposed to people playing tennis. And when conversations are like a tennis match with I go, then you go, then I go, then you go, it's not going to be a learning conversation because people are busy and being defensive. If you can just get people talking about like, hey, what would happen if? What would it look like if I got a raise? What would it look like if you could get a good evaluation next year? What would that mean for you? So again, kind of learning what can happen next. And again, focusing on that. 3, ask questions. And again, not questions like, what's the matter with you? Not a good question to ask somebody unless they're choking or something. Even then, you're totally different. But yeah, what's the matter with you? Not a good way to start. Ask questions like, hey, is this the kind of work you've always wanted to do? Where's your passion? Get somebody talking, get somebody thinking. And again, if you ask questions and get somebody talking, usually the tension goes down and they are much more open to hearing what you have to say. Okay, also acknowledge your feelings. Don't let them derail the conversation, but hey man, I'm really nervous. Hey, I'm sorry, I'm really nervous. This is really important to me. I'm nervous about it. Or like, this is really difficult to bring up, but I'm gonna do it. Okay, 5th one is important. consider the person and make sure to say, hey, look, you're working really hard. Here's a few things you can do better. Hey, look, I love working here. This is a great company. I'd like to be paid more. And I find it really rewarding. I'd like to be compensated more. 6 is avoid presuppositions and loaded language. So don't do the extremes, don't do the presuppositions, because again, that puts the person on the defensive. And last, appreciate how difficult it is to hear. Try to think back, and we've all been on the receiving end of bad news. We've all had difficult conversations. So think about back to what it felt like when it was you in that role and try to keep that in mind. Okay, next up, on the other side, feel free to say, hey, look, this is really, and I muted my phone, but not my cell phone, but not my office phone, which I've just muted there. So feel free to come out and say, hey, look, this is really hard for me. Sometimes if somebody's just like being difficult about stuff, I'm like, hey, look, this is not helping. What you're telling me is not helping this. Can we focus on something that's helpful? So feel free to name that. This is difficult. Okay, and then they'll understand. 2, acknowledge your emotions and think about, hey, look, think about naming them. Like, I'm really disappointed in you. On the receiving end, I'm ashamed. I thought I was doing a great job. I'm really ashamed of myself. Okay, 3, ask questions, but don't just ask questions to ask questions and really think about what the answers are. So what were your expectations of me? Instead of saying, well, those are bad expectations. Okay, I understand now. I thought this was the expectation. I was misinformed. Okay, 4, if you want to address the presuppositions, do them calmly. So, hey, somebody who really wanted to succeed wouldn't make these mistakes. I do want to say, I do want to succeed. And maybe it's not coming through the way I want it to, but I really do want to succeed. 5, not everybody is going to be skillful, and some people will dump a lot of stuff on you at once, and it's difficult to separate identity from what happened here. Try to do it. I mean, think to yourself, okay, this actually is something that happened to me when I was working in casino hotel security. I had a patron came up to me, and like I'd been in the same post for a while in front of the convention level elevators, and she just said, "Is this all you do?" And for some reason, I probably shouldn't have spoken up, but I'm like, I do a lot of things at this job, and this job is a very small part of my identity. So I guess doing that, but internally, like, I'm pretty good at a lot of stuff. I'm trying to do better at this. This is a strong, so you're not getting your identity tied up in it. Next is try to shift to problem-solving mode. Okay, if you're in the receiving end of this conversation, you are somebody's problem, or at least they perceive you to be their problem. Make yourself a partner in solving the problem. And it could be like, hey, you're not working out in this job, and you're like, you know what? I was thinking the same thing. I've got applications in at 8 different places, and I'm ready to give my resignation. So let's just get it, hey, if you can just give me a couple of weeks to get through this. That's really extreme. In the better cases, you can, and from that point, now you're no longer a problem. Now you're helping them solve the problem. But again, if you can try to say, okay, I understand that these are some problems with the performance, what would help? What could I do that would help if I tried it? Well, could I try this? Could I try that? What would work? And again, that gets the person, let me think if that would work. And you're also sending the message that you respect the other person's opinion because you're asking them a question. And again, trying to solve problems. Okay, finally, appreciate how difficult it may be for the person to bring this up. And again, most people are not cruel people. The majority of people in this very small sample don't like confrontation. So appreciate how difficult it is to come to somebody and have that difficult conversation. Okay, so which is harder for you? If you have to give, another poll question, if you have to be part of a difficult conversation, would you rather initiate it, the person giving the bad news, or the person getting the bad news? And everybody's different. Some people it's easier to like, hey, we're making some changes here. Other people, they would rather be the person who gets the bad news. And it's not unanimous. Most people are saying initiate over receive, which I can see. I can definitely see that. And I think this just shows how you think about the person having the difficult conversation. And obviously, usually there's a power differential. So our empathy usually goes to the underdog. But in this case, it can still be, we should be very aware that it is difficult to initiate this, even in the best of circumstances. Okay, so I've got some pitfalls here. We're very close to wrapping up. So these are some pitfalls. So things on both sides. So whichever side of the conversation you're on, here are some things you should not do. And again, once more, this is where it helps to have a game plan and be intentional and think about it before you do, and consciously think, I'm not going to say this. As much as I want to say this, I'm not going to say this. Okay, number one, never assume that you know everything. Nobody knows everything. You might not, even if you know everything, you might not have the context. Okay. Number two, don't assume you know intent. Again, somebody is driving erratically, somebody's speeding, well, they just don't care about other people. Well, maybe somebody is in their car having a cardiac event and they're rushing to the hospital. You never know. You can make assumptions, but you never know their intent. Three, and this, I'm kind of in the car thing. This is what they tell you in your car insurance thing. After an accident, do not accept or assign blame. Kind of the same thing. And there's a temptation to, number one, blame people. Number two, take all the blame on ourselves. Oh yeah, that's totally my fault. Which sometimes you want to, if you really think it is. But instead of using blame, I think it's valuable to talk about contribution. Because it's very rare that any situation, one person is 100% right and the other person is 100% wrong. There's usually some contribution, like, hey, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have written that email to you in that tone. That wasn't acceptable. The other person would say, well, I shouldn't have responded in the way I did. So you're both acknowledging contribution, but you're not saying, well, I'm wrong or you're wrong. You both contributed. Okay. Fourth thing to avoid, as we've talked about quite a bit, is don't use language with presuppositions unless maybe they're positive ones, but the negative ones you want to avoid. And you want to really, when you say something, again, the four things that you say, when this person tells other people what we talked about, what are they going to tell them? And what's the worst spin they can put on what comes out of my mouth? Because a lot of times, again, I work with a lot of people in conflict. I hear one person, well, here's what happened in the conversation. Another person says, here's what happens. And basically one party is just giving the worst version. They're giving the other person no benefit of the doubt. Assume that's going to happen. So you want to really scrub the presuppositions out of that language, be very clear, and don't have anything like that. Okay, next, as I said before, you don't back anyone into a corner, you don't give them any outs. And again, this is something that they use, for example, if anybody watched Law and Order, the detectives, whichever, Briscoe and Logan, whichever detectives, Briscoe and Curtis, all the detectives, they all kind of do the same thing in the interrogation room with the murder suspect. They want to get a confession. They're like, hey, you didn't mean to kill him, the gun just went off. As opposed to, okay, you killed that person, we know you meant to do it, you're gonna face a death penalty. Like, hey, maybe you didn't mean to do it. Maybe it just went off. Oh yeah, you're right, I didn't. I was just trying to scare him. I didn't know the gun would go off. Okay, obviously that's, that's in a legal context, but again, in a conversation, you don't want to force somebody to choose between you're totally wrong or, the other person's wrong. So you don't want to back them in a corner. Okay, so I'd like to have a little discussion here. So you can kind of chime in here and just kind of say a couple things. Keeping the keys in mind, you can be productive in your conversation. Remembering them can keep it productive. Any thoughts about this? Any other things you think are important or any questions you have about how to approach certain types of conversations? And feel free to use chat, voice, if that's allowed. Because we do have a little bit of time. I like what Russ says. Okay, And I want to get into this a little bit. So some people say, well, if having the conversations in person, I get emotional. So I want to have all my conversations through email. Okay. Problem with that is in email, we do not know tone. And again, in my role as ombuds, I have people coming to me showing me emails. And they'll say, this email is really hostile. And for me, it's kind of like, I could read it that way, but I can also read it this way. And they sent it, you emailed them at 9:30 at night. They responded back at, 10 o'clock. They were probably tired. That's important. So I think that is. I like what Clay T says. And of course, Clay T, director of the Oral History Research Center, asks phenomenal questions. So yeah, asking questions and listening is important. Oh yeah, again, like Renee says, you can unmute. Yeah, and again, just anything you want to chime in here. We've got a couple minutes and then I'll go to the final poll question, then we'll have some wrap-ups. I've got a little guide we can share and some contact info for your UNLV person and want to talk with me personally about a difficult conversation. Okay, so this is a good one. If you know that you'll cry if you initiate the conversation in person, is there a way not to get emotional or to get over them beforehand? So there's a couple different ways to approach this. One is to get all the crying out beforehand. I don't know if that works. The other one would be to try to be totally not emotional. What I've seen work well is when people are ready to incorporate the emotion. So basically, you want to go in with your plan A and plan B. So plan A is I do this, I don't get emotional. Plan B is if I get emotional, I will do this. And this is where that training is really important. Having a game plan is really important. Having options is really important. When a sports team, and I sound so generic here, like when the Golden Knights, they're trying to get into the playoffs here, when they go into a game, they have a plan A. I mean, obviously the plan is to score goals and don't let the other team score goals, but they'll have some specific things like, okay, this one player, here's how we're going to neutralize him. If plan A doesn't work, they then have a plan B. They don't just like, all right, we're going to freestyle it. That doesn't work. So it's a good idea to say, all right, hey, look, if I get emotional, here's what I'm going to say. You can have something ready to say, kind of like comedians with hecklers. Every comedian faces hecklers. I'm not a comedian, so I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that they have some stuff, just some, I guess, stock responses they use. I'm pretty sure they don't have to think on the spur of the moment, like, okay, how can I respond to your heckling? So you kind of want to have a game plan with, okay, if I get emotional, I'll say, okay, I'm getting emotional. This shows you how important this is to me. So that's important, Any follow-up to that, Nat? I like what Eric says, seek to understand, but I think that's what I would do. I would plan to incorporate it. And I think a lot of good leaders are able to incorporate emotion into what they do. Yeah, again, like Russ says, seek to understand, assume the best intentions, or even assume no intentions. Like, okay, I don't know why this is what happened. I don't know why it happened, but I just know that it happened. So I want to go to 129175's question. Any suggestions on how to educate others to properly use their words to prevent confrontation? Okay, so a good way to start that conversation is, hey, I know you're not really a confrontational person, so here's a couple of tips that will help. Because you're coming at, instead of coming at it from saying, hey, you need to fix what you're doing, you're like, hey, I know you know what you're doing. Here's a couple of tools for you to use. So that's one way I would start. I would also, what I like to do with people, and I work with people with all different levels of confrontation. Some people, and again, some of the people I work with are faculty. Faculty are used to always being the smartest person in the room. That's literally what they get paid to do in the classroom. So they are usually very sure they're right. A lot of times I like to say, hey, what outcome do you want from this conversation? And again, if you just want to make the person feel bad, that's easy. If you want them to respond positively, let's think about the strategies you would use and let's flip that on you. And if they have a good level of empathy, you can say, well, if somebody, we can role play. Well, hey, I'm going to start a lot. How would you start this off? Okay, well, I'll try that with you. How do you respond? So that's how I would start it. I would say, hey, here's some tools. This is difficult. And it also gets into de-escalation. So maybe you start totally, totally neutral, and the other person escalates it. Like, hey, was there a lot of construction road work today on the way in? What do you mean? You're saying, I'm late? You can't, yeah, you're late. You're 10 minutes late. You're like, yeah, my response to that would be like, well, yes, you were late, but I know that you're a conscientious employee. So I'm wondering, I figure there's something going on. Okay. Okay, so I like what Kim says. I'm getting emotional. I'm present and listening to you. Yeah, and again, and in my job here, oftentimes people are emotional for me, and that's part of what we do. I'm like, yeah, this is emotional. You don't need to apologize. This is cool. Okay, I like E. Jackson's question. How do men or other dominant persons use emotion effective in this area? We are often penalized for showing anything. I would say the person again, like we tend to empathize with the underdog. So the person in the dominant position showing anger, showing hatred, showing frustration, usually reads negatively to other people. Even if there's a perfectly good reason why they're angry or frustrated, usually most third parties who saw that would say, oh, that's the bad guy or bad woman. That's the bad person. So the key is to show emotion in a positive way, which could be empathy, which could be understanding, which could be anything that lets you know that you care about the other person and their perspectives. But that is important. And again, like you have to think, it's kind of like, when somebody has a talk with a high-ranking person, a lot of times the high-ranking people aren't aware of just how intimidating they are. And one word from them can change a whole person's outlook. So yes, I mean, they do need emotional control is important. This is something I've heard said around campus too. For leaders especially, emotional control is very important. And even if somebody is frustrating you, try to keep that under wraps, which we all struggle with. Yeah, so I like what Kim says, take verbatim and accurate notes to process later. Yeah, and like Timothy says, emotions are facts. You can record the conversation. I will say at UNLV, to record a conversation in person, you do need both parties' consent on campus. This is part of the UNLV audio video recording policy. So do not record somebody without their consent. That is potentially a Chapter 6 offense or a fireable offense. So do not record them without their consent. But yeah, if you can record it. What do you do to not be condescending? Yeah, I mean, a lot of it I think is tone. And if somebody accuses you of being condescending, you could say, well, why, say, well, I don't think I'm being condescending. I'm trying to help here. But that E. Jackson, that could be a whole other thing. I want to look into that, to how to avoid to being considered sounding condescending. Because again, that's the kind of thing where it can read very differently. Again, let's imagine an email. Hey, we all know how much effort you put into this project. That could either read as we're grateful, or we all know you didn't put any effort into this. So it's difficult to do. Again, it's difficult. Okay, let's go down. Oh, we have a lot of messages. Eric says achieving agreement can help. Yeah, you want to end on a good note. Okay, starting, and again, here's another thing that I work on with people. A lot of times when I have people in conflict, I try to say, what is something you admire about the other person? And sometimes it's very difficult to get to a point of them genuinely admiring something about them. And my next thing is usually like, well, how good of an actor are you? And if they're not a trained actor, it's like, well, you're not a great actor. Do you think you can really hide your contempt for this person? Do you think they're too stupid to see how much you dislike them? So maybe you want to think about something you legitimately like about them, and that will help you get them on your side. Yeah. Okay, cool. All right, we're caught up with those. Other questions? Oh, and Russ has his hand raised.
Hey, Dave, can you hear me?
Hey, I sure can.
This is awesome. Monty and I met with Dave yesterday, and so we're alums of UNLV and excited to be on the call. So love all this. One quick question I had is, in dealing with conflict, a lot of times you try to do it yourself and you don't reach out to a third party, kind of your whole reason of being, right? With the Ombuds office, like, how do you not fall in a trap of continuing to try to figure something out without, like, when do you seek that intermediary? When should you get somebody in the room? When should you, because I think a lot of times you just get so deep that you forget, like, you know what, like, this isn't working, you know what I mean? So just a question I figured I'd ask.
Sure, it's a great one. There's actually a formal conflict resolution, I don't know what you call it, study model of this, where there's basically 9 stages of a contribution. The first 3 you can solve on your own, the next 3 you can solve with intervention, and the last 3 you can't solve with anything. So generally speaking, I like to say the sooner the better, because you can't really put the toothpaste back into the tube. So before you kind of, let's say, hey, I have a disagreement about one thing. All right, next I'm going to go to my supervisor and tell them how bad the disagreement is, or whatever. Well, now the person has to defend themselves with the supervisor. So I like to do an early intervention from outside, which could just be as simple as, hey, let me talk to the ombuds. What's your read in this? What are my options? And again, like I like to say, I'll suggest options, you make decisions. I'll kind of walk people through that. Well, hey, you could do this, you could do that. There's a whole range, a whole continuum. But I think in general, it's good to get outside perspective early on to avoid the truth assumption and the intention invention. So that would be my thing. Start early.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, cool. All right, let's go to the poll question. So this is the final poll question. What was the most interesting little concept that we introduced here? Was it the 3 difficult conversations, the 3 parts of the conversation, the power of weaponized presuppositions, or the danger of loaded language in extremes? So we kind of 3 different things we talked about, 3 concepts here. So I'm just kind of curious. And again, I have no real strong personal opinion one way or the other. It's just kind of interesting for me to understand what people get out of this. And I do want to do another whole other presentation about the stages of conflict, because I think that's interesting. That's in my development queue. All right, it's fairly even. Weaponized presuppositions is a good one. Okay, so now, if you are a UNLV employee, you can contact the Ombuds for help with difficult conversations. Everybody, and I believe, okay, so Renee just put this in the chat. So if you want to scan it with your phone, you can, but if you're on your PC already, if you're watching this on your phone, I guess you couldn't scan it with your phone. But anyway, on your PC, you can go into the chat and we have a link to the contact info. And I also have a downloadable guide we put together. I'm going to be updating this and adding some questions to it to help you prepare for the difficult conversation. So questions you ask yourself before the conversation. So we're going to be adding that. But basically, the downloadable guide summarized everything we do. A lot of times people ask for the slides. The slides are just kind of there. So this has all the cool points, right? And I appreciate you all. I'm really happy. I really do love doing this kind of work. And I love talking to this group in this forum. So this is really great for me. So thank you all very much. And yep, feel free to reach out. And if you're non-UNLV folks, I can't help with official ombuds and stuff, but always happy to talk. Cool. Yeah, I'm really glad everybody liked it.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Schwartz. We appreciate you continuing to support our Rebel Recharge program and providing such great information, especially today, so that we can use both personally and professionally. So much appreciated, and a special thanks to everyone in our audience for joining us on a Friday. We hope to see you back here next month for another program as well. Renee does an amazing job of creating interesting content, informative content, and we appreciate everyone being here, and I wish you all a great and wonderful weekend. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Dave.